Thank you for watching this presentation entitled Untangling the Complexities of School-Based Musician Social Interactions. I'm Dr. Jared Rawlings at the University of Utah. I currently serve as Associate Professor of Music Education, Chair of Music Education, Associate Director of the School of Music, as well as Director of Undergraduate Studies. Before we begin with the study, I want to acknowledge my funding sources and a disclaimer that this research was supported by the College of Fine Arts and the University Research Committee at the University of Utah. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of myself, and they do not reflect those of the university. So as a brief overview, I'm going to do one slide on the introduction and presenting relevant research. I'm going to go ahead and describe the method, present the results, as well as a brief discussion of implications and recommendations for future work. So relating to relevant research, we know that there's evidence in music education research that suggests that youth enrolled in music ensembles are targets for bullying, and little is known about how experiencing bullying during early adolescence relates to perceptions of mental health or well-being. And so this study was conducted to examine the prevalence of bullying within an instrumental music ensemble. You can see from the research that's presented on this slide, I am highlighting some of the work that's been done at our university Arts and Health Innovation Lab, as well as our bullying research program. You can tell that the topics that have been uncovered, we had work to do in this field. There wasn't much work done prior to 2016 with only a few ancillary references to bullying specifically. However, there was enough evidence to kind of start to collect a rationale for investigating this, and as you can see, it's kind of taken off a little bit in the last 7 to 8 years. So given this background research in adolescent development, we also need to capture the good behaviors that exist. And so if we are able to, as researchers, describe adolescent social behaviors, particularly in this instrumental music ensemble, I needed to have a robust investigative procedure to account for this. So we're going to jump to the method. So before we do this, just a brief presentation of the purpose of this study, as well as the research questions, which have to do with investigating the descriptions of their social interactions, how these social interactions impact their well-being, and to what extent, if any, does participating in the music ensemble enhance or dampen in their social interactions. I utilized a mixed methods design, specifically an explanatory sequential design, and this design exists and can be found in Cresswell's mixed methods book. Just to see what I collected, I first began with some observation, approximately 300 hours in various settings at an overnight band camp within their classroom when school began, during their marching band rehearsals and competitions, traveling with the ensemble on school buses to their competitions. It was quite an experience. Also knowing that in the questionnaire administration, I was also asking music teachers for their perceptions and maybe explanations of what was happening if I didn't understand myself, as well as having focus group interviews, individual interviews, of course, transcribing those interviews and having external analysis done to make sure that my codes and themes were valid. There's a lot of data in this project. Most important at the bottom, looking at 700 pages, over 700 pages of GroupMe chat data. And GroupMe is an app on a phone. It's a communications app where you can be in a large group sharing information. And this included not only the music teachers, but also other kind of music staff that served as an instructor, as well as the student leadership. In addition to the 710 pages of data, typed data, word data, they sent 413 memes over the course of this investigation, which were mostly entertaining. The results seem to to fall into three large themes. I'm presenting only three, given the constraints of time, and all are protective factors, known protective factors in adolescent development. The first one is looking at this idea of connectedness, and Barber and Schluterman in 2008 described connectedness as youth's feelings of closeness and being supported and cared for by peers, ostensibly the music program. So I did look at what variables influence connectedness the most. Instrument choice did, where the low brass students, and these are the students, the youth who play like trombone, euphonium, tuba, that they self-reported the most connection to their peers, and rightfully so. They spent a lot of time with each other as a group being social outside of the school day. They would get to school early and they would hang out with each other, and they would help each other with musical passages or maybe other homework things. They would stay after school together in a group. They were a very tight-knit, close clique. The number of music classes also influenced school connectedness as well as peer connectedness, where the more band classes that someone was enrolled in, the more likely someone is going to self-report the following statements as very true. So my peers trust me, my peers in band listen to what I have to say, and my peers in band understand me. This is maybe not a unique finding in music. We just have more information now, more nuanced information, where in music education specifically, I've wrote about this before, but also other authors, mostly from Europe, have described this as well. So Pittman as well, and Hugo and Davison, especially high levels of peer connectedness being associated with positive health outcomes. The second theme that I found in this data set was about resiliency. And Bonanno, Westphal, and Mancini described resiliency as a stable trajectory of healthy functioning after a highly adverse event. I looked at some of the variables of influence, but I also have an audio example to share. To protect the youth participants' identity, I did distort the sound, but you should be able to hear it clearly. And here is an example of resiliency in the music classroom.
Honestly, band is my escape in my life away from those hard things. But because I was able to see them go through their hard things, I noticed things that they did and didn't do that I either wanted to do or didn't want to do. I was able to, when I was younger, before I got to middle school, I was able to find those tools that helped me push through things. And then when I've gone through harder situations, like I said, I'm definitely not perfect at this. So definitely something I struggle with a lot. And like today, I'm going through some hard things, but I feel like I'm able to push through them and find the happy moments by going through the tools that I have found that work for myself. So one thing that I've done a lot is when I get new music is I go through and I play a lot that first day, because then I get the tune in my head. And if thoughts come in my head that are degrading that I don't want to have stay there, I'll play through the music. Once I get to a point, I'll be feeling along to, and then going through, like with marching band, I was marching the show down while I was going down the halls to try and keep myself proactive and not have to worry about.
So in addition to this audio example, youth described how the music ensemble is a home away from home, because they feel accepted by their peers, and that this acceptance contributes to resiliency towards bullying episodes. The last theme was hope, and Snyder, Irving, and Anderson in 2011 define hope as a positive motivational state that is based on an interactively successful agency and pathways. So the idea of goal-directed energy as well as planning to meet their goals. And so this exists in the next audio example as well. I do want to say that there are some loud beeps that are meant to anonymize who this person is. And so when he's talking about other peers, I had to cover up the names of these peers. And so that's what you're going to hear. I apologize if you find it annoying.
Especially being in the top end, it has been kind of challenging in the instrument where you're looking for such, you have to pay attention to such little detail or something goes wrong. I feel like I feel like I'm able to, when I'm going through a hard thing, I'm able to remember that I can do hard things, especially after being marching band. I'm like, yeah, I can do a lot. And so I think going through music and getting to the point that I'm able to, I definitely feel confident in my life situations, more than I think I would have been if I hadn't done music, because it is such a hard and very delicate thing, or it's so precise with everything. So I feel like because I have to pay so much attention and focus into this, that I can focus on something else and get it done. No matter if it seems huge, I feel like I can do it as long as I'm like, if I'm looking at a song, just like looking at the whole thing, it's overwhelming. But if I go through and look at the little details, then make little goals and able to go through. So I feel like I do that with my life. I'll set little goals and I'll push through till I reach that, and then I'll make another one and keep going and keep building upon that. And then I'm able to complete whatever big thing I'm trying to complete.
So given these three very prominent themes that emerged from this data set, there's a lot to consider. These three things, connectedness and resiliency and hope, are known protective factors in the adolescent connectedness and educational psychology fields. And it's interesting, at least to a bunch of people in music education, that if we're finding that hope and resiliency and connectedness are sort of enhancing their social interactions, as well as dampening the frequency of bullying episodes, either as the perpetrator or the victim, then it stands to reason that maybe we could consider that if youth are enrolled in some sort of a school-based music ensemble, there may be some protection happening. And thinking ahead to understanding a classroom, especially a music classroom, as a psychologically safe environment, this is promising. On the other hand, there's also limitations to this research, right? I only looked at one school, one program, and trying to encounter multiple programs at the same time was not feasible. So as kind of an exploratory study looking at this using a mixed methods design, there's hope. And looking at some of the other limitations before implications, is that these were volunteers. I had a large number of youth want to participate because they knew who I was. I spent a lot of time and have spent a lot of time in this school district. I've done a lot of rapport building with the parent group, with the administrator, and that doesn't go kind of unnoticed as well. So it's hard for educational researchers to walk in to a school district and conduct a study. And the idea of building rapport with an administrator, with teachers, with students takes time. And I hope that there are going to be future researchers who pick up on this work and who do more of this work, because there is a wealth of information to know more about. I would also encourage people who are looking at this that they would also perhaps partner with someone from music education or music therapy to help maybe uncover some of this nuance. So with that being said, I mean, from the findings, it revealed information that contributions to the complexity of bullying and how music ensemble participants respond and or are resilient to a particular incident. Instrumental music ensembles and classes are complex. They're complex social environments. And as this is the first mixed methods investigation of bullying in music education research, the results from this investigation do uncover additional insights about the particularities and peculiarities of geographic location, of school culture, as well as the instrumental music class culture. I am looking forward to your questions. I want to thank you for your deliberate attention and time joining me with this presentation. See you soon.
Hi, my name is Catherine Graves, and I am a part of the Bully Prevention Lab under Dr. Chad Rose at the University of Missouri. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the investigation protocol that we as a lab have created for bullying incidents, and more specifically, how this impacts youth with disabilities. So our agenda today, what we're going to talk about is the definition of bullying. We're going to briefly talk about creating a bully prevention task force, and then how do people report bullying within schools and districts, as well as more specifically, we are going to talk about interviews and investigations into these reports. And then finally, once you finish the investigation, how are you going to make decisions as a school on what needs to happen following the incident report? And finally, just a few additional considerations. So first, the definition of bullying. From WABF 2005, this is the definition. It includes three major things: the imbalance of power, repetition, and intent to cause harm. So as we conduct our investigations into these bullying situations, these are three things that we have to keep in mind in order to determine whether the incident is bullying or not. Why? Why do we study bullying? Well, the US Department of Education in 2015 came out with a statistic that 1 in 5 students are bullied in their K through 12 experience. That is a lot. 1 in 5 students have experienced bullying. That's why we do it. It's because bullying can have negative outcomes on students, and we are here to stop those. And through stopping those, we have to intervene and create interventions. So how do we get to that point? How do we get to creating interventions for students within schools? These steps that I will present to you today are the pre-steps for schools to then lead to intervention. So as I'm talking to you today, this is the perspective that I'm coming from, the social ecological model. So initially we have the individual, right? And this is over time and through context, bullying happens. So we have the individual, and they have family factors that affect them, as well as peer and school factors, then community factors, and then societal factors. So this is where bullying occurs in all of these situations and contexts. And this is what we have to keep in mind as educators. All right, so the first step that I'm going to kind of talk to you about is within your schools, you need to create a bully prevention task force. And this task force will be made up of a staff member from each group, like a gen ed teacher, a counselor, a special education teacher, an administrator, a paraprofessional, a parent. This will be a group of people that essentially can take what is learned and talked about in this task force and take it back to their respective colleagues, and then help them and train them as well on how to deal with bullying. But these are the people that ultimately make the decisions for the policies and procedures for the school. So some questions that before you start creating your action plan as a team that you need to ask yourself as a team. These need to be discussed. So first, is bullying even a problem at the school? And what types are happening and where is it happening? These three things are things that can be collected from existing data sources within your school. So for example, office referrals, screeners that may be implemented at the beginning of the year. Any of that data can be used to answer these questions. Okay, so the next question is, where do students seek help? Where do they go when they need help for anything? And then next to the reporting process, how do students report it, or if they observe it or experience it? Is this a process that's easy? Is it accessible? So Dr. Rose once told me a story that he was working with the school, and he went into the school and was kind of asking about their bullying policies and procedures, and asked, how do students report bullying? And in the office, they pulled out a hot pink sheet, and this hot pink sheet was what students filled out. So if a student knew that there was something happening, they had to go into the office, and everyone could see that they were filling out this hot pink sheet reporting a bullying situation. That's not ideal, right? We want students to be able to make this anonymously if they need to, online, at home, off the school website. So there need to be a lot of different reporting options for students. We'll get to that later. I'm a little ahead of myself, but this is an important question. Also, what is your school currently doing to prevent bullying? How do they combat bullying? And are there any interventions in place? Are there any data collection methods? Next, the team needs to ask, are there subgroups of students at higher risk for bullying? More specifically, students with disabilities, ethnic or racial differences, any of those different subgroups. Where do staff feel students should come seek help? So where, as a team, where do the staff want to be asked help from the students? Who is involved in providing that help? Also, what are strategies that are most successful in bully prevention? And that's kind of why I'm here and why the bully prevention lab works with so many schools and districts, is because sometimes as a school, the research to practice gap is very large. So we work with schools in bringing that research to the classroom, to students that are involved in bullying. And then the next question is, are students aware of the reporting procedures? So kind of like we said earlier, do they know how? Not only do they know where to report bullying, but do they know how? And do they know what it looks like? And do they know what's appropriate and what's not appropriate to report? That is very important to get an accurate representation of what bullying is actually occurring in the school. Are the staff aware of these policies, as well as the district level and maybe even the state level? Do they know what is required of them and what is required of the students to report bullying? And then finally, what are the parent perceptions of bully prevention efforts? So our task force is made up of a parent as well that is representative of the staff or of the other parents. And so how can this parent speak to the perceptions of what bullying is within the school? Do they think it's a problem? Do they think that the school is handling it well? What can be improved? And what the school is doing well? So those are a lot of questions to help start getting your task force to create ideas. Okay, next I'm going to briefly talk about reporting. So I'm talking about when a situation in a school happens and a student feels that they were bullied by another student. So this is when the student that was bullied goes and makes a report and basically says, this is what happened. This is the situation that happened. Not a lot of state policies describe specific things that school districts should do in terms of reporting. They don't have guidelines. They don't have suggestions. So that's why we're here, is to help provide these procedures. Okay, so just initially, the team should consider what should be included in the report. Who can receive the reports? Who's going to be in charge of receiving all the reports and then further going and doing the investigations? Who can make reports? So what parties? Can parents? Can bus drivers? Can students? As well as what methods will be used to make the report. So not the hot pink sheet in the office, I hope. Hopefully online, as well as paper. How will all of these reports be stored? That's important. And who will have access to all of these reports? Okay, so let's address types of reports. The Bully Prevention Lab suggests that there should be 5 main types of reports: that written hard copy, the electronic, a verbal. A verbal should be able to occur, as well as anonymous and identified. Okay, so next we're going to go into the meat of this presentation, the investigation procedures. All right, so after the reports have been received, state law says promptly that the investigation procedures should happen. How often? Schools are so busy. How soon should this investigation happen? The recommendation is within 48 hours to help target and intervene in this situation. So after receiving the report as well, they will consider all of the information. The person who was bullied, the nature of the allegations, and who, if they have it, who reported it, who was a bystander in that situation. Then it is important to review the existing data. So that is teacher reports, nurse visits for these students, mental health records, talk with the counselor, if the student has a disability, any assessment data that might help give clues into the situation that was reported. So then formally, the Bullying Prevention Task Force will conduct interviews with those involved using an established interview protocol. The benefits of having the Bullying Prevention Task Force conduct these interviews, as well as it just being more than one person, right? We just want more than one person involved in this whole process. So it provides multiple perspectives on the situations. So that eliminates a lot of bias. So the teacher interview will occur with the main teacher that was engaged in the bullying situation, if there was any, as well as the alleged person who engaged in the bullying behaviors. They will have a right to defend themselves if they so please. And finally, the decision making happens, and we will talk about that further in the presentation. But essentially, you bring all the information that you have and that you gathered and refer to the decision making protocol for the next steps. So real quick, sources of existing data, kind of already talked about these: mental health records, academic records, office disciplinary records. This is all important to consider when you are evaluating the situation. Okay, so this is an example interview process that the Bully Prevention Lab developed. This is comprehensive. It asks many questions that can basically, I mean, it says what happened right before the incident. That's the antecedent. What happened right after? That's the consequence. Are these bullying behaviors being maintained by something? And this will help the Bully Prevention Task Force get a full picture of what is happening. Okay, so next, this is the interview. These are the components, kind of what I just showed you on that report form. All of these things should be considered. It gives the best full picture of the incident. Okay, so when you are doing a brief teacher interview, a few considerations need to be considered and asked about. Does the student have strengths? What is their academic? What is their social functioning? Do they have friends? How do they interact with their friends? That kind of thing, as you interview the teacher to get their perspective on the situation. Here is a brief teacher interview protocol that we developed as well. This is comprehensive, and it's designed to establish a pattern or discern changes over time with that student. Okay, finally, decision making. So after conducting all the interviews and reviewing the existing data, it is your job to meet and determine making a plan for intervention. The determination process. How do we know that this is bullying? Well, we go back to that definition. Was there an imbalance of power, intent, and was it repeated? Or are the behaviors likely to be repeated? So those are all really important things to consider. Here is a decision-making sheet that can help school districts specifically fill this out and make a decision on was the incident bullying or not. Okay, so this is a little flow chart. So once you complete the investigation, If the incident is determined to be bullying, determine a plan to address the bullying behavior and notify all the individuals of next steps. That is special teachers, regular teachers, parents, everyone involved that needs to be involved. Then you go ahead and implement the plan and follow up afterwards to ensure the approach is working, right? We don't want the same situation happening over and over and over again. If this situation is determined not to be bullying, follow your school's code of conduct to determine any disciplinary actions that need to happen for the incident that occurred.
Hi everyone, my name is Patrik Söderberg. I'm a doctor in developmental psychology at Åbo Academy University, Faculty of Education and Welfare Studies in Vasa, Finland. And I'm here today to talk with you about experience sampling measures and how that might be applied to bullying research. So let's step right in. And I'll start by noting a few challenges in current bullying research. And one of those is something that we learned from witness psychology, namely that our long-term memories might not be as reliable as we think they are. And in particular, when it comes to this kind of phenomena that has a social desirability component. And we also know that although we have a common ground kind of definition of bullying, when it comes to specific behaviors, students, teachers, and researchers might not always agree on whether that's bullying or not. And from previous international conferences, we learned that although the anti-bullying programs tend to have, in general, a positive effect, the students that are the worst off also report the least improvement from these programs. And a common theme in a lot of studies today is that they rely on these traditional surveys. And someone said it, and I'm not sure who did it, but it's such a great quote. It's like a movie review based on a blurry photo. And here, the experience sampling measure. And there are some other terms, as you can see. Daily diaries, intensive longitudinal designs. There are some differences here as well between these terms. But the common ambition here is that instead of using traditional surveys, of getting this blurry photo, we want to use several short measures over time. So like an old Disney cartoon, we put the photos one after the other and they get a kind of movie. And this kind of data collection method is actually quite old, but it has been becoming increasingly popular over the last decade, and in particular in physical and mental health studies. And of course, the reason here is that the technological advancement, both in data collection tools that we are carrying around us, our mobile phones, and can, in that sense, use to report on our behavior, and other wearables and tracking devices. But also that our computers now have higher processing capacity and are able to do more complex analysis. And from an analytic perspective, what the experience sampling measures does is that it allows us to separate a between and within person variation in a phenomena. So for example, to not only look at if I have more stress than you, but also to look at what kind of situations that trigger my stress, or so to speak, to be able to take the pulse on how my week or how my month is going, what the things are that kind of influences how stressed I'm feeling right now. And also to see that whether there are certain people, certain groups of individuals that are more susceptible to triggers and uplifts, or more kind of reacts more strongly to their environment. And I noted that this has been increasingly popular in mental and physical health studies. However, there is clearly less research focused on the school context and focused on social experience and interactions. And this is kind of the background of Project Reboot in which I'm working at the moment. And next up, I thought I'll show you some behind the scenes progress on 3 studies that we are working with. So there are 2 empirical studies and 1 literature review. And to start off with one of the empirical studies, this is one on the 7th graders. 7th graders were asked 2 times a day, each school day, for a week, for 5 days. So they had downloaded an app and were carrying around their mobile phones. And 1040 and 1400, they were sent notifications and they were asked to answer questions such as, how do you feel right now? How stressed are you right now? How happy are you right now? How frustrated are you right now? And as you can see here, I have gathered some of those negative affects. And for example, here we have stress. And as you can see, on a typical day, kind of the mean of this curve, on a typical day, about 20% of the students report that they are feeling stressed. But on Thursday, we see this peak. And if we include other negative affect or other variables, we can see that, yes, there is some variation here. Of course, there is, because there are many things that influences how angry I am or how stressed I am. But we also see this kind of common pattern here, that on Thursday, there's kind of a peak in the pulse of the school group. In addition to those questions about feelings, we also asked whether the students had been badly treated or treated someone else in a bad way, or been witnessing someone being badly treated. And similarly here, we can see that on a typical day, about 10% of the students say that they have witnessed someone being badly treated. But again, on Thursday, there's a peak. And if you would put these 2 graphs over one another, you will see it's kind of the same pattern here. And my interpretation here is that on Thursday, something happened. Maybe there was a bullying incident or something else happened. And quite a few students witnessed this. And then this kind of carries over into the feelings and emotions. And you can see it in the pulse of the school week, that this is something happening that day. We also asked the students in the evening whether they had, if they had been witnessing someone being badly treated, or if they themselves have been victims, or if they have been perpetrators. Why did this happen? And when we asked the bystanders that have been witnessing someone else being badly treated, they attributed this to being a rivalry between 2 fighting individuals, or that the perpetrator was being mean. This being mean is also something that the victim replied, that is about meanness, it's about doing something bad to me. But the victim also didn't think of it as in terms of rivalry, but more said that this has something to do with bad luck. This was a misunderstanding, that I happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And then again, from the bully perspective, or the perpetrator, mainly describing why were you doing these things? It was out of necessity. I had to do it. Maybe the other kid was so obnoxious. It was kind of bothering the whole group, so I had to step in. And this kind of really, to me at least, shows something that we might not always get out of ordinary studies, that when talking about the same incidents during the same day, we can see that depending on what kind of role you had in what's happened, you might have different perspective on this thing. We also did a study with teachers, or are doing a study with teachers, on stress and workload and enjoyment and social interactions. And of course, let's start off with, of course, the workload part, which is not shown here, that having unexpected tasks upon you, or not being able to take a break, those are heavy indicators of stress. But also when we look at the positive social interactions, so helping someone out, we can see that this is associated with stress, but only at the between person level and not at the within person level. And what does this mean? I'll show you here. It's like, as you can see here, like if you're having a lot of support on average, those individuals tend to be less stressed. But in the moment when something is stressing you, to get that pat on the shoulder does not necessarily alleviate the stress. It doesn't take away that initial reaction. Even though on average and over the whole week, people that receive more support will also be less stressed. But in the moment, there's something else. And on the other hand, for enjoyment, work enjoyment, how fun was it at work today? We can see that this is associated both with within and between person positive social interactions. So here we see kind of a different pattern that for those that on average received quite little support, they didn't find work as fun as those that received high support. But also regardless of if you had much or little support in your life in general, when someone came and helped you, or when someone encouraged you, it's much more fun to be at work. And this is also true for being more meaningful and these positive kind of experiences. But it doesn't necessarily take away that immediate stress reaction. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough, or not unfortunately, but we didn't have like enough negative social interactions to include in this analysis. So this is something that we will be going on with as a next step. And as for the systematic review or systematic mapping that we're doing, this is based on screening about a bit over 2,000 studies and finding about 52 studies that are measuring in one way or another social experience and interactions within a school setting. And a few of those are actually about some form of negative peer interactions. And without going into the details, some key findings here is that experience sampling measures with social variables is an emerging and heterogeneous field. The studies that are reporting intra-class correlations show that there are substantial within-person variation for social variables. So that means that there's actually a value in doing this kind of study, because not only do people differ between one another in how much they enjoy their company or how much they are experiencing victimization, but there is also this day-to-day variation that needs to be explained. Unfortunately, only less than half or only a quarter reported this kind of within-person measures. And neither were there enough reports on item suitability, why a particular item was chosen, or why people and when people complied with the study or dropped off. And finally, there is no intervention studies identified within this sample. So in summary, and the story so far, we feel that ESM studies does provide a promising avenue because it has the potential to address some of those shortcomings in current research. But there is a great need for grounding the studies in theory, not least since ESM studies provide such a rich data that it's easy to go and fish for significant values. And this also shows the need for replication studies. Finally, there's a need to consider the participant, not only in terms of statistical power, but also in terms of how to keep participants motivated to complete the studies. And here we can talk about a few ideas in the Q&A afterwards. And our next step now is to conduct a study with both teachers and students from the same schools to see not only how teacher workload and social environments affect teachers' well-being, but also whether this might spill over to student well-being and vice versa. And now I'm curious to see if you see any applicability in your own field in connection to ESM studies. Thank you.